Yeah, I will start the recording, and maybe let's start with like introduction. I guess
And
many.
before we start, Mike, if you want us to turn on the videos and just to be more participatory, let us know. I think you're highlighted, so most people see you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so still just for preference.
Yeah, I mean, if people are comfortable turning their videos on, I always love to see folks, but sometimes you can't do that given where you are or you don't want to. So whatever works for everybody is fine with me. Nice to see everyone. So do you want me to just dive in? Anything you want to say before we get started?
So thank you everybody for coming. And here is Mike, who will be like giving his knowledge and motivation to us today. Thank you very much, Mike. And the word to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm here in my home office in California, a little north of San Francisco, near the Silicon Valley area. So it's 9 a.m. or a little after 9 a.m. where I am. I know it's in the early evening out where you are, and I feel humbled and honored and grateful to get to be here. I'm going to talk a bit about some aspects of my work, but I thought I'd start with a little bit of my story and my background. And there's actually a connection that I have to Ukraine. Now, I've never been to Ukraine. So, however, my father's side of the family is Ukrainian. In fact, my great-grandfather, Victor Robbins, in the early 1900s, was forced to fight in the Russian army. And he didn't want to, but he had to. And he was very upset. He was very concerned. He had just fallen in love. And he knew that if he stayed in the Russian army, he was probably going to die. And so what he ended up doing was he defected and left, which was a dangerous and somewhat crazy thing for him to do at the time. And he left and went to Argentina by himself to set up life there. And once he got life set up in Buenos Aires, Argentina, he came all the way back to Ukraine and smuggled his beloved, his girlfriend at the time, who he wanted to marry, out of the country. And she went with him back to Buenos Aires, and they got married and they set up their life there. And they were there for a few years. And even as beautiful and wonderful as Buenos Aires is, they wanted to come to America. So in 1908, they came to the United States and landed in Boston. And my grandfather was born just a few months later. And ultimately, that's why I and the rest of my family are American. And in fact, our family name really was Ravinsky. But when my great-grandfather was at Ellis Island coming into the United States, he thought the name sounded too Ukrainian, too Russian. And he said, I want to sound more American. So he tapped the guy on the shoulder in front of him and he said, what's your name, sir? And the man said, my name is Robbins. He said, that sounds good. So when he got to the front, he said his name was Victor Robbins. So I say all of that, not knowing anything of what it's like to be in Ukraine, especially these days, but knowing that my family is connected and by heritage, we are Ukrainian. So with that, a little bit about my professional background and the work that I do and what we're going to talk about today. I've been for the last 20 plus years speaking and writing and coaching and working with people and leaders and teams, lots of startups here in the Silicon Valley area, as well as lots of much bigger organizations, focusing a lot on mindset, on teamwork, on collaboration, on how we navigate through changes and challenges and difficulties. And the most recent book that I wrote is called We're All in This Together, which actually came out right as we were getting into COVID a few years ago. And a lot of people were using that phrase, we're all in this together, where I didn't write it with COVID in mind. But one of the questions that I was getting asked a lot a few years ago, especially as we got into COVID and it was really impacting life and business and everything, as you all well know, in addition to everything that you've been going through over the last number of months with the war, people started asking me, are we really all in this together? Because it doesn't actually seem like it at times. And I was hearing this from business leaders who were having to make a lot of difficult decisions about their teams and the future of their businesses with so much uncertainty. I was hearing this from people who were dealing with all kinds of stress and challenge in their own lives. And I've even been talking to folks, again, not knowing anything of what you all are experiencing in Ukraine and some of the other things that are happening in other countries and places around the world. And what became abundantly clear to me at the time, and it's probably always true, and it's definitely still true these days, it's not so much that we're all in it together. It's more like we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And to me, that's such an important aspect of life, of leadership, of understanding how we connect with each other and collaborate, even and especially when things are really difficult and challenging. So this session here today, tonight for all of you, this morning for me, what I'm hoping we can focus on for you is to share a few things from my work and my research over the last couple decades that may be and hopefully could be relevant and useful given everything that's going on, the stress, the challenge, the fear, the uncertainty, the disruption, the difficulty, trying to continue to navigate your life, your business, your team in the midst of all of this. And there's three things that I want to focus on. And I really want this to be as interactive as possible. So I'd love for you all to ask questions, make comments, share, interrupt me, talk. Let's just have a bit of a dialogue. But we're going to focus first on mindset, growth mindset specifically. Then we're going to talk a bit about authenticity, which is something that I've studied for a number of years. And then we'll talk about appreciation. So those three things, above and beyond just about anything and everything else that I've studied and worked on through all these years of working with teams and leaders and people in different environments, when we can really embrace that, when we can really operate with a growth mindset, with authenticity, with appreciation, not only does it benefit us personally, which it does, but it can have a real impact on the people around us. So my hope again is that you find this useful, but not just interesting, but actually useful and valuable in a way that you can actually take away and use for yourself right now in your real life, with your real team, in your real work, with your company, with all the different aspects of like life and work that you're dealing with these days. So with that, I'd love to just start with a question, which I often ask teams and leaders and startup founders and people that I work with, but I would imagine it's a little bit more of not necessarily a loaded question, but a relevant and challenging one for all of you, given everything that's going on. What are some things you're finding right now that are most difficult, most challenging, most stressful for you on a daily basis in life, as leaders, as founders? And feel free, if you want to use the chat, you can use the chat. If you want to type, if you want to just unmute yourself and share a little bit verbally, that's cool too. But what are you finding most stressful, most challenging these days? So to plan at least something, right, Natalia? Being able to just make some plans, figure out what can, right? Yeah, I can imagine the uncertainty. Update goals. Krilly, thank you. I'm just looking in the chat, right? Being available as in finding time. Okay, I have growth and delegation. Uncertainty, right, Alex? Grow. And yeah, staying positive when so many people around are not. Yeah, Ariane, that's huge, right? It's hard. There's like not a lot of good stuff happening, just sort of generally speaking. And you know, 2 years of COVID and all of you, especially dealing with a war that again, I can't even imagine. I have no personal experience with that, but just with so much happening around us. You know, I do remember, for what it's worth, not that it's the same, but I remember being at an event back in 2003, 2004, when the war in Iraq had just started or had been going for a while. And there was someone from Iraq who was on this panel. We were talking about peace and things that were happening in the world. And he was explaining to us, living in a war zone, it's like almost impossible to even think about making plans or what's going to happen next week or next month, or trying to plan things in life. Or he's like, that conversation doesn't even really happen. It's not like you run into a friend and, hey, we should get together. And just when he said that, as simple of a concept as that was, it really resonated with me. Like, oh my goodness, I think about the stress and challenge in my own life and some of the stuff that can be hard, but you know, it puts things in perspective, right? So planning into at least 1 month in the future, right? That's Anna speaking to that exactly. To pivot to another market and recreate liquidity, right, Ivan? You know, and I'm just, you know, I appreciate, again, hard to focus. Look, and the things you all know, for each of you, look, again, same storm, different boats. You know, some of you, I imagine, are still, I was talking to the team as we jumped on, those of you that are in Kyiv and other places still in Ukraine, maybe some of you have moved elsewhere to try to stay safe. Whatever the situation is, just trying to figure out, but how do I navigate my life? How do I navigate my business? There's so much uncertainty. We were even talking before we just started with the team, like, you look, even prior to the war, you know, we've been in the midst of this global pandemic for over 2 years. And I would imagine for some of you, thinking back to the early days of COVID, or even just a year ago, it might seem like the good old days. And, you know, there's a lot happening. And I don't say any of it. Look, you all know this better than I do. I won't pretend to know what the real challenges and stresses are that you're dealing with. But the reality is, even the most intense challenges and stresses that we're facing, even the most intense uncertainty in business, in life, there was stress and challenge, I would imagine, in your life a year ago, 5 years ago, right? And there will be in the coming months and the coming years. And, let's hope, Ukraine's victorious in the war, and this intense conflict and challenge that you all as a country are in the midst of gets resolved as quickly and positively as it can, right? Same with respect to the pandemic, which has changed and evolved and isn't quite as debilitating, at least in the present moment, although still here. But we can't control those things. Those are huge macro things that have a big impact on our lives. That's a big storm that we're all going through collectively. The reality is, though, and again, in no way to minimize the stress or the challenge, a question that we don't often ask ourselves, especially when we're dealing with things like life and death, we don't often ask ourselves, how do I deal with stress and challenge? How do I relate to it? What's my mindset? What's my approach? And again, whether we're dealing with a pandemic or we're dealing with a war or we're dealing with something maybe we've never dealt with before that is about as significant and serious as it gets, or maybe we're just dealing with, hey, I've never had to make these decisions as a business owner, as a leader, as a human being, as a friend, a sibling, a parent, whatever the various roles we play. There are times in life, I mean, my wife and I have 2 daughters who are 16 and 13. I am constantly humbled by how much I don't know in life in general, and especially about parenting and parenting teenage girls in the middle of a pandemic. It's like every day is like, oh, don't know what I'm doing. Don't know what I'm doing. Never dealt with that before. Never had to make that decision. Never gotten that piece of feedback. What the heck is going on? It's like super humbling. And there's dealing with the stress and the challenge of the present moment and trying to solve the problem or keep myself or my family safe or make a good decision as a business owner, all the things we got to do. But then there's, hold on a second. Again, what's my mindset? What's my approach as it relates to stress and to challenge? And there's 2 pieces of feedback that I've received over the course of my life. I mean, I've gotten a ton of feedback, but there's 2 things I often think about in this regard. And they came in the form of feedback from friends of mine, which I'm grateful to have some really wonderful people in my life. A lot of us are fortunate enough to have people around us that give us feedback or support, whether we necessarily want it or not, and whether we always appreciate it in the moment or not. It's super important. But I was talking to a friend of mine named Brian many years ago. So part of my background, I was an athlete for most of my young life growing up. I played baseball, which I don't know if there's much or any baseball in your part of the world. I don't think baseball is very big in Ukraine, but here in America, it's kind of a big deal sport. And I was really into baseball. I really loved it. I got a chance to play baseball in college at Stanford, which was pretty cool. And then I got a chance actually to play professionally with one of the professional teams we have here in the US called the Kansas City Royals. I signed a pro contract. I'm doing that for a living. Unfortunately, I got injured early in my professional sports career. I hurt my arm. I tore ligaments in my elbow. I had a series of surgeries on my arm. And even after I did everything the doctors and the physical therapist told me to do, I was forced to retire from baseball. I started playing when I was 7 years old. I got injured when I was 23, and I finally retired at the age of 25. So as you can imagine, when this happened, I was pretty upset, right? I was devastated. This had been the focus of my life, and it felt like my whole life just got sort of ripped out from underneath me. I didn't know who I was. It was more than just what I did. It was like my whole identity, right? I ended up getting a job working for a tech company here in the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area. But I was lost. Like, who am I? What am I going to do? I don't know. And my friend Brian, who's a couple years older than me, took me out to lunch. And he said something to me that day at lunch that I never forgot. He said, Mike, when you go through something difficult or challenging in life, there's a tendency to ask a really simple but very dangerous question. He said, you're probably asking yourself this question right now. I'd be asking myself this question if I were you, but I want to warn you about it because it's dangerous. He said, here's the question. Why did this happen to me? Or why is this happening to me? He said, totally makes sense. You didn't choose for this to happen. It happened. You tried really hard. You worked on this for your whole life, and this happened, and then you tried to come back and you couldn't come back, and now your life's taken a left turn in a way that's probably pretty painful and doesn't seem quite fair. He said, but if you keep asking that question, it's not only not going to help you, it's actually going to hurt you. He said, but if you change one word in that question, it'll fundamentally change the way you're relating to this challenge and any challenge you face. He said, change the word to the word for and ask yourself, why is this happening for me? He said, it doesn't mean you like it or agree with it or think it's wonderful. He's like, I'm not talking about phony positivity. He's like, I'm talking about challenging yourself to look for the opportunity in the midst of the challenge. How is this going to make you better, stronger, more resilient? What can this teach you? And when he said it to me, to be honest, in the moment, I didn't totally understand or even agree with him. I thought to myself, he does not understand what I'm going through. Because he didn't, right? Brian hadn't played baseball for 18 of the first 25 years of his life. He wasn't going through a major identity crisis, right? But I knew he wasn't trying to mess with me. I knew he was trying to help me. He was trying to challenge me to look at things differently. And I left lunch that day and thought to myself, why is this happening for me? I don't think it is, but that's interesting. And I continued to ask myself that question in the days and weeks and months, and quite frankly, years it took me to make my way all the way through that difficult transition. Now, I can look back now, all these years later, and see a ton of things that happened for me as a result of that painful and challenging experience in my life. The more important and more challenging thing for us to do as human beings and as leaders is can I bring that awareness into the present moment when I and we are in the midst of challenges and stress, when we're in the midst of uncertainty, when we don't know how the story ends. And again, I don't say this in any way to minimize the level of stress or challenge or the severity of it. However, that mindset, that growth mindset approach of looking at the challenges, looking at the difficulty, looking at even the fear or the disruption or the failure or the challenge or I don't even know how we're going to navigate through this as an opportunity is fundamentally what really separates great entrepreneurs, great leaders from ones that get stuck. It's not a function of how big the challenge is. It's a function of our ability to meet the challenge, to try to navigate through it, and not just the challenge that we're currently facing, but then setting that mindset and that tone that ultimately impacts the culture of the team around us. So I have another story I want to share, but I just want to stop for a moment and ask you this question again. And I'm sensitive to the fact, just like my friend Brian had no idea what I was actually experiencing when he gave me that feedback that day, I have no idea what you're actually experiencing in your real life as it relates to all that's going on around you. I can imagine, but I don't have any lived experience of that. So I'm sensitive to that even as I ask this. But as you think of the current challenges you're facing with your business, in your life, with what's happening in your country and around you with people that you love and care about, if you think about the most stressful, painful, difficult, challenging aspects of all of that, and you ask the question, why is this happening for me or for us? Is there anything that comes to mind? Any thoughts you have about that in asking that question in relationship to what's going on right now? Another way to think of this is, what are some things you've been learning in recent weeks and months as you've been grappling with all the different aspects of the things going on in your life and your business? What are some ways that you've grown? What are some ways some of the people around you have grown or been forced to grow or change or pivot or adjust? And again, feel free to use the chat, or if anybody wants to just chime in verbally. I talk a lot and I talk fast, so you got to interrupt me sometimes if you want to get a word in. What do you think? Why is any of this happening for you, and or what are some things you've been learning in recent days, weeks, months to become stronger, right, Alex? Yeah. I mean, look, it's a cliche and it's kind of trite, but there is some truth to, people say if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And sometimes I have sort of a love-hate relationship with cliches. They're usually cliches because they're true, but I think we hear them so often. And again, they may be different culturally. So maybe some of the cliches we use here in America are different than ones that are used, right, to become more flexible, right, Stacey? Absolutely. To relaunch. Kirill, that's huge. right? Being asked to drop plans, drop what you want, be open to very different things that you had planned, right, Ariane? It's like letting go of that attachment, thinking we know how it's supposed to go, and then going, well, maybe I should just adjust, right? Again, I'm just reading some of the stuff in the chat. To grow, right, Mariah? That's huge. So Andrew, to write a book on how you created an EdTech unicorn during the war. That's pretty remarkable to be able to do both of those things. Writing a book's no small thing and not easy. I know a little bit about that, but being able to, create an EdTech unicorn in the midst of that, that's quite a compelling story, right? To understand your own borders, right, Tanya? Yeah, where are those boundaries? Where are those places that, right? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to get the world to get to know how amazing Ukrainians are, Anna. I mean, look, a lot of people in the world are paying attention to you, which is necessary and important, but again, like here in America, we're so self-absorbed, we barely pay attention to what's going on in Canada or Mexico, which border our country, let alone countries that are elsewhere farther around the world. And, people are having conversations or trying to understand or listening and learning or wanting to know, wanting to support. And so there can be ways to even utilize or capitalize on. I mean, the fact that we're even here having this conversation is in part motivated by the difficulty and the challenge that's going on in Ukraine right now. So to see the potential of how united we can be, right? Katerina, that's really important. And again, I hope when I pronounce your names, I hope I'm saying them at least close to accurately. But yeah, so look, you can see, and again, this doesn't magically mean, oh, isn't it great we're having this war? No, it's not great. It's awful. It doesn't mean like, oh, isn't it great we've been dealing with a global pandemic for over 2 years? No, it's terrible. Like bad things happen in the world. You all know this as well as anybody right now. Bad things happen around us. Hard things are going on in our lives, in our businesses, in our families, in our communities. And so it's not about sugarcoating that or with some toxic positivity, pretending like everything's okay. It's about challenging ourselves to look at the challenges from a different perspective and to remember how strong and resilient we are. Now, one of the things that can be really challenging for all of us, myself included, and I've had to grapple with this over the last couple of years going through COVID, is like, what happens when we're facing challenges we've never faced before? Which, by the way, even with no pandemic and no war, you all as entrepreneurs signed up for that. You're going to face a whole bunch of challenges that you never faced before, and you're going to have to try to figure those things out. Sometimes some of the challenges that come up will be similar. Oh, hey, I dealt with this before. I have some experience or wisdom. A lot of times they just won't. But I went through an experience a number of years ago, and my friend Ariane, who's here on the call and who invited me to do this. Good to see you, Ariane. Ariane and I actually have a mutual friend named Theo, who I've known for a couple decades. And I was going through a really painful and challenging time in my life. This was probably about 10, 12 years ago. We had young children. We were dealing with, my business had grown. And then when the economy tanked sort of globally back in 2008, 2009, 2010, it really impacted my business. And we were dealing with some pretty severe financial challenges. And I'm trying to run my business and trying to support my family. And the girls were really young, and it was a super scary time. And then in addition to that, my mother got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and it did not look good. And I was sitting out in a parking lot in front of an event I was going in to speak at. And I was talking to my friend Theo on the phone. And I was telling him all of these things that were going on, the financial challenges and the fears I was having about fatherhood and my mother being sick. And I said to him, I don't think I can handle all of this. It's too much. And he said something to me on the phone that day. He said, look, Mike, I know it might not seem like it right now. And I know these things you're facing are really intense. He said, but you have to remember, you have more than this requires. And I said, what? He said, up to this point in your life, Mike, you have made it through 100% of every challenge that you've ever faced. You've survived. Now, it's not always been perfect and pretty, but you've made it through. You're here. So you have to remember how resilient you are, how strong you are. You have more than this requires. And I don't know that I even totally believed him in that moment, but I listened to him. And as I think about making my way through those financial challenges and the difficulty, and, you know, my mother got much more sick and sadly she did pass away, and that was very painful. But as I look back on that experience now, I can see not only did I have enough to make it through, I had more than was required, although it was challenging and it was painful, like we've been talking about. And with respect to growth mindset, I learned and I grew, and so many things, even in the midst of those challenging and painful circumstances, came out that ultimately were positive and benefited me as a human being, as a father, as a business owner. And so I say all of that again, this is not for us to dwell upon what's challenging or what's negative or what's hard, but when we're going through hard stuff or there's hard stuff happening around us, yes, we have to figure out how to survive it, how to get through it. But there's a way in which if we open ourselves up enough, not only can we get through it effectively, hopefully, we can actually learn and grow and change in positive ways in the process. And by the way, impact the people around us in the most positive way we can, even in the face of some difficulty and some stress. So I want to stop now just for a moment. Like I said, I talk a lot and I get going and I get excited. Before I shift gears to talk about authenticity, I just want to see if there's any questions or any comments or any thoughts with respect to what we're talking about in terms of mindset, growth mindset, and how we deal with difficulty and change and uncertainty and stress. Again, feel free, you can type them in the chat. If you have a question, you can just unmute yourself if you want to just ask it verbally. You know, and I appreciate the comments in the chat, by the way. I mean, things about learning how to accept things and pivot and adjust. And again, I know there's a specific intensity of what's going on right now in Ukraine that, again, hopefully will not exist for a long, long time, continue to, but there's going to always be stress and challenge and uncertainty. So Ariane asked a great question. What's your tool for stopping the very first negative thought that shows up first thing in the morning? You know, there's a couple things that I've done over the years, Ariane, with that one, because I don't know about you. I mean, I'm actually I'm decent at falling asleep at night, but sometimes I will wake up early in the morning, especially when things are really stressful in my life, and my mind will start racing with all the things going on. Some of us have more challenge, you know, getting to bed at night with that happening. So whatever your pattern is, and some of you that may not be an issue at all, but there's a couple of things that I've learned to do first thing in the morning that tend to help me. One thing, and this is really challenging for me, especially these days when I go in and out, I try not to have my phone sitting right by me next to me on the bedside table, that I pick it up right away and look at it, because that can just get me into a whole thing of, you know, the world and work and life and what's happening. But what I used to do, I used to have the alarm go off and I would hit the snooze button on it, and my wife would get really annoyed. But even before I was married, that would happen. And sometimes in the snooze, you know, because you never really fall back asleep, I would actually start to think about, if I could remind myself when I was in that half awake, half asleep mode, I would try to do a mental list of things that I'm grateful for. And just think about some of the things that I'm grateful for as a practice. That's something that I do now, and I write it down in a gratitude journal. But what the two things that I do these days that tend to help me, and this also relates to the question about what to do when I feel stressed. There's a third thing, Katerina, that I'll add to that, but I do try to meditate in the morning, and I meditate in bed for what it's worth. I don't get up and sit. I don't have a cushion. I don't have a altar in my, once I'm awake, I've now trained myself to not fall back asleep, and I just close my eyes and I meditate in bed, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for half an hour. It just kind of depends on how I'm feeling, what's going on. I also have 2 journals that I write in that are here in my office. And I usually come down to my office once I've gotten out of bed. And one of them is a gratitude journal. I write down things that I'm grateful for. And another one's just a regular journal that I just share thoughts, whatever's going on, try to get it out of my head. Because Katerina, one of the things I've noticed for me about stress, and the third thing that I do to when I'm feeling stressed, is I have a handful of people in my life who I trust and I feel safe with, who I can reach out to and talk to. Yesterday, I called my friend Ray. I was feeling incredibly stressed about some aspects of parenthood. Ray happens to be someone who's raised his kids. They're now in their 20s and out of the house. So he's one of my parenting mentors. And I was having some real challenges with our 16-year-old and feeling incredibly stressed about fatherhood. And I called Ray and just kind of vented some stuff out, got it out, and then got some feedback from him. And I felt a lot less stressed out because he just heard me and said, I understand. I think for a lot of the startup founders that I work with and people who are building businesses, having a network like people here on this Zoom call and others who we can reach out to and say, hey, this is really hard, or I don't understand this, or I'm having a really hard time with this, especially people maybe who are going through it presently or people who've gone through it in the past and can relate. So those are some things that I do personally and I think can be really helpful. But you all have your own practices, knowing your own personality, right? Knowing your own style, your own rhythm and cadence of how you live your life, but finding practices. What we do first thing in the morning and what we do right before we go to bed at night are super important for our well-being and our mindset and our approach. It looks like Stacy just posted something in the chat about a great thank you diary to start practicing gratitude. I love that. And there's lots of tools. There's apps and tools online. You know, I'm kind of an old school, like I have a pen and pad. It's an actual journal. Something about that actually helps kind of calm me down. So any other thoughts, any other questions about growth mindset or sort of dealing with stress and challenge before we move on? Okay, well, cool. And you all are being very nice and polite. I appreciate that a lot of you have your cameras on, which it's nice to see you. I mean, some of you don't, that's cool too. But you're definitely welcome to unmute and just talk. And again, I know I'm talking fast and I hope I hope it all sort of resonates and makes sense. If something I'm saying is like, what are you talking about, crazy American man? You can just put that in the chat and be like, we don't understand that. We don't use that word in Ukraine. I'm trying to be as culturally sensitive as possible, but I'm a straight white American dude who's just, lives my life and knows what I know from my perspective. So, Andrew said, do you recommend finding a mentor? Are there any tips on choosing one and asking them to help you? Look, I'm a big believer in mentorship. I think it's super important. There's no way, I've had my business for over 20 years. There's no way that I would be able to do what I do, especially in the early days, without mentorship. Even now, I was saying, I have mentors in various areas of my life. Ray's one of the fathers that I know who I love and adore and trust and respect. So when I'm having a meltdown about parenthood, he's one of the calls that I make. I think a lot of people are willing to mentor us. My approach to mentorship has always been like, it's not like I have just one mentor and that person is the be all and end all mentor for me. I feel like I have a bunch of mentors, some of whom are much older and have been down the road further, some of whom I interact with more. I even feel like I have what I like to call, or a friend of mine calls, friend-tors, which are like friends that are mentors. My friend Ariane, who invited me onto this call, is someone I consider in that category, where I am able to learn from her or reach out to her and ask for support, for advice, for feedback. What do you think about this? And those relationships often go both ways. So I think, again, finding people and just letting them know, I respect you, I trust you, I would love for some mentorship from you. And then being open to whatever, some people are really busy, but most of my experience, when we ask for mentorship from others, people are usually honored and flattered and willing to do it. And a big thing to remember about asking for mentorship, if they say yes, or they provide any mentorship to us in any way, what's really important to do is not only thank them, but if we do take some of their advice and go do something with it, and it works, go back around and thank them and tell them what we did with it, because then they're more likely to want to continue to help us. I mentor a lot of people in my life these days and I love it. But what can sometimes be annoying is to spend some time with someone or share some ideas or some wisdom or whatever and not hear from them again, or 5 years later, oh yeah, by the way, this all happened, thanks. And it's like, oh, it'd be nice to be included. So there's a little more connection or commitment, if that makes sense. All right, so let's move on. We talked a lot about mindset, growth mindset, how to navigate stress, challenge, uncertainty. Let's talk a bit about authenticity. Authenticity. So I'm curious, when you hear that word authenticity, or you think of being authentic, what does that actually mean to you? How do you define authenticity? Oh, Ariane, thank you. You think of me. Well, I appreciate that. In addition to that, those of you who don't know me as Ariane does, when you think of authentic or think of the word being true and honest, right, Zena? Absolutely. Be honest of who you are. for sure, Stacy. Real, not fake. Definitely, Anna. Right? Innerly true. Being innerly true, Stacy, right? Unique. I like that. Being the real you, sincere, feeling free and natural by acting from within, being okay with that and happy. I love that. That's a good one. Genuine. Again, I'm just reading some of the chat. Yeah. So look, we know what it is. Real, not prepared, own your stuff, treat me as an equal. Yeah. Like, look, there's different words and phrases that we can use. We kind of know, we usually know it's also kind of a feeling, right? When someone's being authentic or real with us, we can feel that. When we're being authentic and real in life, we can feel that. When we're not, usually we have some sense of awareness that we're not. And here's the thing about authenticity. Now, I've been studying authenticity for, gosh, 14, 15 years now. And I find it really interesting. And I've seen it evolve and change over the last decade and a half. I think we talk about it more, we understand it more, we embrace it more these days than we did. But I still feel like there's sometimes a bit of a misunderstanding about what it actually means to be authentic, to show up authentically, to communicate authentically, to lead from a place of authenticity. I was speaking at an event a number of years ago. This was, pre-COVID here in the US. And it was actually here in Silicon Valley where I live. And it was a bunch of folks from different tech companies, big and small. So it wasn't just for one organization, but I was speaking about authenticity and the importance of it at this event. And that was kind of the theme of my speech. And I get done speaking, there was a couple hundred people in the room. And I walk off stage, I go to sit back down at my table where I was sitting up front. And this guy gets up from the audience, makes a beeline right up across the room, right up and gets right in my face. And he says, I'm authentic all the time. And I was like, okay. He seemed upset. And I was like, what's the problem? He said, well, I've lost some jobs because of that. I said, really? He said, yeah, not everybody can handle it. Now, this dude was like mad. And I didn't know him, right? But I was getting a pretty strong sense of his personality. And I'm not exactly sure what prompted me to ask him this somewhat provocative question, but I looked him right in the eye and I said, now tell me the truth. Is it authentic or obnoxious? He was shocked. I was actually shocked, like, oh my gosh, I said that. But after his moment of shock and mine too, he kind of laughed and then I laughed and then he said, well, maybe a little bit of both. And I said, all right, man, I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the self-awareness. I said, I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess, I bet it was the obnoxious that got you fired, not the authentic. Because we don't usually get ourselves into trouble for being too real, too genuine, too. Now, look, we might say things or do things that people don't like or don't agree with. Right? There's going to be conflict. There's going to be disagreements about stuff. But I think what happens, and look, I know this varies culturally. So again, I'm not specifically familiar with Ukrainian culture and how people communicate or don't communicate or interact. And even here in the US, it's not all the same. Different parts of the country and different families and backgrounds people communicate. My wife and I grew up less than an hour from each other. And our style of communicating and our way of talking and interacting is very different because we came from very different families. So I say all of that because I think what happens is we think of authenticity in this limited way, or that's this binary thing. Like I'm either brutally honest or not. And in actuality, what I've learned through researching this, and this is super important from a leadership perspective, from a team and culture perspective, and just from a relationship perspective, is that yes, authenticity is about honesty. That's the foundation. But we have to remove something from our honesty and we have to add something to it if it's actually going to be authenticity. The thing we have to remove is our self-righteousness. And the thing we have to add is vulnerability. So honesty without self-righteousness and with vulnerability, that's authenticity. But that's a heck of a lot easier said than done. So I want to talk about each of those things, self-righteousness and vulnerability, just for a minute, because they're important for us to understand. When I say self-righteousness, what do I mean by that? How many of you, like me, have a lot of opinions? And how many of you, like me, think your opinions are right? Yeah, of course we do, right? There's nothing wrong with your opinion. You're entitled to your opinion. I got lots of opinions. We got opinions about life, about business, about politics, about religion, about people, about sports, about everything. And look, in some cases, our opinions are very well thought out. They're very well researched. We have a ton of experience. We know exactly what we're talking about. We have data and information to back it up. In other cases, it's just kind of a gut feeling or it's just a values thing, or it's just that's what I believe, or that's what my family and I believe, or that. And any and all of those opinions are valid and okay. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of our opinions. The issue isn't with the opinion itself. It isn't the passion with which we hold it, or even whether we speak up about it or not. The issue is the self-righteousness with which we hold the opinion. Because if I have an opinion about something and I'm right, like self-righteous, and you don't agree with me, what does that make you? Wrong. Now we have a problem. I'm right, you're wrong. Now the problem isn't that we disagree. In fact, that's important. When I work with teams and they say, oh, everybody gets along great, there's no disagreement, there's no conflict, I'm always like, uh-oh, that's a problem. That's a red flag. That means people are lying if there's no conflict. That means people don't feel safe to really speak up. You want there to be healthy debate, healthy discussion, healthy disagreement within your team. Now, I'm not talking about people yelling and screaming at each other and being mean and disrespectful. That's not productive. I'm talking about healthy debate, discussion, disagreement, challenge, sometimes agreeing to disagree, but being able to really address the important issues on the table. But there's a difference between self-righteousness, which is I'm right, you're wrong, and conviction, which is I believe this to be true. I'm willing to speak up about it, engage, debate, discuss, but I have enough humility, enough self-awareness to realize a couple of things. First of all, I might be wrong. And second of all, maybe it's not even a right wrong thing, but can I at least acknowledge maybe there's another way to look at this thing that I can't currently see? Which is always true, by the way. And look, the best leaders and founders of companies that I've worked with over the years, usually they're pretty smart and passionate, but they also, with all their different personality traits and quirks, most of them, the ones that really thrive and succeed, know that it's important to have a diverse, talented, smart group of people around them who will challenge them and speak up and don't see things exactly the same way and have skills that they don't have and are willing and confident enough to bring people in who are better and smarter at them at many things, knowing that's going to make us better. If I have to always have the right answer and be the smartest person in the room, that's going to limit the ability of the team to be successful and for the company to grow. Does that make sense? The thing though about self-righteousness that's tricky, look, overt self-righteousness, which we see all over the place on social media and in the world these days, which most of us don't enjoy and appreciate, that's actually easier to spot, even as toxic as it is. What's more insidious and dangerous to teams and families is the sort of underground, more passive-aggressive self-righteousness, even when we think we're being helpful by giving advice and feedback to the people around us. When you and I are being self-righteous in that way, we don't think we're being self-righteous. We just think we're right. I'll give you a personal example of this. Maybe you can relate. And hopefully this translates culturally. But my wife, Michelle, and I, we've been together for over 20 years. As I mentioned, we have two daughters who are 16 and 13. Samantha's 16, Rosie's 13. About 4 years ago, we were in the car, the four of us as a family. So the girls were like 12 and 9 at the time. And we were backing the car out of the garage where we park the cars here at our house. And we were in Michelle's car, but I was driving. She asked me if I would drive, and I said, no problem. I drive her car sometimes. But the way that our cars sit in our carport, in our garage where they are, they're very close to one another. So when you back out, you have to be careful. You don't hit the other car, or you don't get the mirror caught on the side as you're backing out. And whenever I'm in Michelle's car, I have to take an extra minute because it's a little bigger than my car and it's different. And I have to adjust the mirror and the seat and be extra careful because, and this particular day, I'm not sure why, but it seemed like her car was parked really close to mine and almost at an angle. And as I was backing out, I was worried that I was going to, scrape the cars into each other. And in the middle of my struggle, I stopped and I turned to Michelle and I said, hey, babe, if you park the car just like this, and I started explaining to her how I park and you see where this is going, right? And how I keep space in between. And in the middle of my explanation, our 9-year-old at the time, Rosie, our younger daughter, says from the back seat, hey, dad, stop mansplaining to mom. To which at first I was very impressed that our 9-year-old daughter knew what mansplaining was. And I was like, that's awesome. But I said, hold on a second. I was not mansplaining to mom. I was simply and I look at Michelle and I look back at Samantha and Rosie, and all three of them were like, yes, you were. And I stopped and I realized, oh my gosh, I was, right? What was happening? It wasn't set up. The whole situation wasn't set up exactly the way I would have set it up. And in the midst of my discomfort, I decided that was the appropriate moment to coach Michelle on the proper way to park the car. How many of you can relate to either side of this scenario? Yes, you're probably not surprised to hear that Michelle was not sitting in the passenger seat of the car saying, thanks for the feedback, babe. Anything else? No, she was like, I'm good. Because look, here's the deal. I love this woman. I adore this woman. She is smart and talented. And like, I am super grateful and lucky to be married to her. Okay, let me make that clear. But in that moment, I was essentially saying, I parked the car the right way. You parked the car the wrong way. I am superior. You are inferior. Now, I wasn't saying it like that, but that's where it was coming from. That's where self-righteousness comes from, is I'm right, you're wrong. And the natural human response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. Look, even if we have let's just say, here's the problem, because you are really smart. You have lots of good ideas. You have lots of things you want to share with your team, with the world, with your family. So we got to figure out, how do we take that passion and communicate it passionately, authentically, but not from a place of self-righteousness? Because if we do, we lose the audience. We lose the person or the people we're trying to influence and inspire, because all they hear is, you're wrong. And it's super tricky, right? Katerina is asking a great question. How do you lose the eagerness to find the truth or fight for what you believe when you acknowledge that it's more important to get along with others? So that's a really important and nuanced question. I love that you asked that, because what I'm not saying is we all got to get along. It's nice when we do, but sometimes we're not going to agree and we may not get along. And a team and a family and even a country and a world isn't about everybody holding hands and getting along all the time. It's about finding that place of truth. Now, look, we can fight for what we believe in. We can look for the truth. And when we're talking about issues of life and death, we're talking about issues of war and peace. Some of this stuff, I realize there's a limiting capacity to it, because ultimately, if someone's trying to kill me, I am not interested in finding common ground with that person. If someone is trying to harm me in some way, I'm interested in simply just protecting myself and getting away and being safe. Now, when we're dealing with our families and we're dealing with our teams and we're dealing with the people we work with, usually and hopefully, it's not a life and death situation. Sometimes it can be that they maybe are causing some harm to us, either physically or psychologically or emotionally. Now, again, in those situations, we want to do anything and everything we can to keep ourselves safe and protect ourselves. The vast majority of situations in business, even in life, we're debating ideas, we're debating values and perspectives, we're trying to influence one another. And when that is the case, Katerina, what I would say to you too is, I think sometimes we're trying to go after the truth with a capital T, forgetting that, look, there are times when certain things are valid or correct and other things are invalid or incorrect. When we're talking about data, when we're talking about science, when we're talking about information, most often when we're talking about values and we're talking about even strategy and ideas, those things are subjective. There's not like an inherent truth or an inherent right way to do it. It's just what I think is the right way and what you think is the right way and what the team thinks is the right way. And we're going to have to figure out how to make the best decision possible. And that doesn't mean everyone's going to agree. But what it means is, if we remove the self-righteousness, that's not taking away our passion or our eagerness. That's not watering down our opinion or not speaking up. That's not saying I'm just going to focus on everyone getting along as opposed to really telling the truth. What I'm saying is I'm going to remove the arrogance that says I'm right and anyone who disagrees with me is wrong. Look, and even when we're talking about issues of war and peace or issues of what's going on in the world and society, you know, one of the greatest leaders we've had in the history of our country, the United States, is a man by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a key leader, the key leader in the civil rights movement here in the US back in the 1960s. And one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King, he said, "We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them." Think about that. We have no morally persuasive power with those who can feel our underlying contempt for them. Now, again, he wasn't saying we have to all get along. He wasn't saying you have to agree with injustice. He wasn't saying it's okay for people to treat you inhumanely. Not at all. But what he was saying is, if we are going to influence people morally, we're going to make an argument for the moral case for why things need to change. We can't do it from a place of contempt, even if that contempt is justified. And look, that's a hard thing to do as a human being. And on a daily basis, again, you all are dealing with some serious stuff happening in your country and your world around you. But on a daily basis, when we're interacting with the real humans we're trying to influence, we're trying to partner with, we're trying to coach, we're trying to get to collaborate with, we got to figure out, right? Andrew asked a great question. How do we deal when we're talking to people who are interacting with us in a self-righteous way? I'll give you a few things not to do. And this is one of my downfalls in life that I still struggle with. Try not to fight fire with fire, meaning if someone comes at you self-righteously, it's not the best idea to come right back at them. For better or worse, that tends to be kind of my default, and I'm continually working on that. My wife continues to help me with that, but like we want to also have some self-awareness. Oh, what do I do? If someone is self-righteous with me, do I get defensive really quick and do I want to come right back at them? Because that will escalate the situation and probably not help. So some things we can do though, we can take a breath. We can also let them know authentically the impact that they're having, not judge them for how they're interacting like, wow, I'm feeling really judged, or I'm feeling really defensive, or I notice I want to start arguing with you about this. I'm not sure, try to put some of our own inner dialogue, the healthiest version of what's going on in our head, on loudspeaker. But telling someone else that they're being self-righteous, hey, you're being self-righteous, in and of itself is self-righteous, it's judgmental. Letting someone know, hey, I'm not appreciating this conversation, or this isn't going well, or this isn't working for me, or I don't really want to debate and argue this with you because it doesn't feel productive, like those kinds of things. Happy to talk to you about this, happy to engage in a dialogue, not interested in yelling back and forth and sort of having a, battle of wills here, because that's not going to go well. I'm practicing this every day, by the way, with my 16-year-old for what it's worth. And I don't mean to throw her under the bus. She's appropriately, developmentally doing what she's supposed to do. I'm not necessarily handling it all that well as her father, but that's a separate issue. So we can practice. And you want to have people around you on your team, by the way, that can point it out. Does that make sense? And the other piece to this, to speak to both Katerina's question and Andrew's question, remember the other piece. So we remove the righteousness, which is not easy. But then what we have to do is add vulnerability. That's often a way to short circuit the self-righteous conversation. What I mean by vulnerability is this. There's a great professor here in the US. Many of you are probably familiar with her and her work. She's out of the University of Houston, Dr. Brene Brown, and she's been studying vulnerability for a couple decades. I love her definition of vulnerability. She says vulnerability is risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. Risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. Can you think of anything meaningful or important that you've ever accomplished or experienced in your life, personally or professionally, that did not involve risk, emotional exposure, or uncertainty? Look, all of you in Ukraine and all of us in the world these days, with what we've been dealing with the last couple of years, we're all living in, and you're living in, a significant time of uncertainty. It's vulnerable, right? You have to either move away or protect yourself or be in a place. I'm vulnerable. Going outside is a risk. Most of us, even with COVID, and as scary as that's been, and wearing a mask or staying inside, like, I don't know what it's like to live in a war zone or a place where you all know that, and you're living that, and there's an intensity to it. But ultimately, it's about embracing that in our lives personally. Can I embrace uncertainty? Can I embrace risks, even if I'm not a huge fan of taking them? And can I allow myself to be a little more emotionally exposed? Meaning, again, someone says something to us and we get defensive, or we get our feelings hurt, or we get upset. Do we have the ability to say, wow, that really hurt? Or I'm really stressed. Or I think this is the right decision, but you know what? I have some doubt about it. I'm not sure. And those are the kind of conversations for us to be having with each other. A mentor of mine years ago said this great thing to me that I never forgot. He said, Mike, you know what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people? I said, what's that? He said, it's usually a 10-minute sweaty palmed conversation that you're too afraid to have. He said, if you get good at those 10-minute sweaty palmed conversations, you'll have fantastic relationships. You'll build trust. You'll resolve conflicts. You'll talk about issues. You'll address the elephant in the room. You'll give feedback. You'll get feedback. He said, but if you do like most of us and you avoid them, then you end up being a victim of who you work with, who you live with. And look, he's right. I don't love having those sweaty palm conversations any more than the next person. I sometimes avoid them to my own detriment, right? Usually when we finally have the conversation, we realize I should have had this conversation a day ago, a week ago, a month ago. It would have been easier. But vulnerability, another metaphor that I use when we're talking about vulnerability is the iceberg. It's about lowering the waterline on our iceberg. And sometimes, to Igor's point or question, is like sometimes we might need a little bit of time or a little bit of space. We may need to step back, right? So that we can reflect, calm down later. That does happen. Sometimes some of us, myself included, will react in the moment. And then whether it's a minute later or 10 minutes later or an hour later, go, you know what? Sorry about that. I was a little stressed. I reacted quickly. Can we have that conversation again? Can we try to address that in a different way? And again, this is about having some self-awareness. How do I operate? And then having some social awareness. How does the team operate? How does the environment operate? What's most conducive to us? And Ariana asked a great question, like, how does a leader expose weakness when your team or family or troops are looking to you for strength and certainty? So Ariana, I love that question. And you know what I often think about this? The metaphor I often talk about is the airplane. There are cockpit conversations and there are loudspeaker conversations. When I'm on an airplane, I want to know information from the pilot or the team up front flying the plane, like, hey, when are we going to get there? What's happening? If we're going to hit some bumps, it's nice to know beforehand. If we're in the middle of the turbulence, hey, we're sorry about that. We're doing what we can. I want them to communicate with me openly, transparently about what's happening, give me information so I know they're in charge, but I also know what's going on, and like, hey, sorry, we're delayed. We'll get there here. We'll do it our best. What I don't want to hear from the pilot is, oh my gosh, this is the worst turbulence I've ever faced. I don't know if we're going to make it. Or by the way, this is only my second flight ever. Buckle up. I don't want to hear that. But I hope though, if that's true up there, I hope they're talking about that in the cockpit. If the pilot's really nervous, he or she looks and says, hey, it's only my second flight. I hope you all have my back. Or, oh my gosh, this is really scary and this storm's really bad. They better be having that conversation with each other instead of all acting stoic and like they got it handled, because then the plane might crash. Does that make sense? So as leaders, what we have to figure out is this a cockpit conversation or is this a loudspeaker conversation? There are times when it's completely appropriate to say to the team, I'm really stressed. I'm really scared. I don't know what's happening. Because that'll actually calm everyone down weirdly. They go, oh, he's human. She's human. Then there'll be moments when you say that, that'll scare everybody. And they'll want to jump out of the plane. But we want to have, and maybe it's just you. If the company's so small, I don't have other people on the leadership team or co-founders. Maybe you do. That's where you have to lean outside of it. And in a community like this, or a place where you have some mentorship, some support, but you have people that are safe, that you can go have those cockpit conversations with, to say, oh my gosh, this whole thing might crash and burn. This might be a terrible idea. But then we come back to the team, and without lying to them, we can authentically say, here's what's happening. Here's what's going, or we're trying to figure this out, or I'm getting some support. So we can do both, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Does that make sense? And look, sometimes we're going to make a mistake one way or the other. We will share too much and it'll scare people, and then we'll realize, oops, I overdid it. Okay. Other times we're going to be too tough and too strong and like, I've got it handled. You can follow me. And when then we learn the hard way, oops, that actually has people feel less safe because they know we're lying. So we have to, authenticity is more of an art than a science. It's about being true to ourselves and being aware of the people that we're around. You know, again, even using parenting as an analogy, there are moments when I literally will say to my 16-year-old, hey, give me a break. I've never had a 16-year-old before. I'm doing the best I can, but I can't say that every day because she'll roll her eyes anyway. But you know what I mean? It doesn't matter, because it's like, but every now and again, I might say, listen, this is hard for me. I'm doing the best I can, to remind her that like, I'm a human being too, not just her dad. Sometimes it's important for the boss, the leader, to say, I really screwed that up, or I don't actually know how to do this very well. Or in hindsight, I should have listened to all of you instead of had my own idea and done that because it didn't go well. And then people will actually respect us more. All right, look, I know we're getting close to the end of our time. I do want to touch on appreciation briefly, but I want to see if there's any questions or thoughts or comments in addition to the great ones we've gotten specifically about authenticity before I talk briefly about appreciation and then we start to wrap up. I get kind of excited about this stuff, as you can tell. So All right, so we talked about mindset, a lot about mindset, growth
Can I
mindset.
ask
Oh,
first?
yes, please. Verbal, I love it.
Hello. I wonder how you meditate. Like, do you really go like, I mean, 100%? Do you really like switch off 100%, or you still keep trying to like throw out your thoughts and stuff? I just wonder about meditation.
I appreciate the question. So look, I love that we talk about meditation as a practice. I practice meditation and fail at it all the time. I've been doing some version of meditation since I was in college when I was 20 years old. I'm 48 years old now. And for me, a couple things that work. I said it earlier, but like I tried for years to find the right technique of meditation, and it never worked for me. What always felt most comfortable to my body and would actually allow me to relax was laying down on my back in bed. But every time I did that for many, many years, I always thought I was like fake meditating, like it wasn't real, it didn't count. And I finally had a teacher of mine say to me, what is there some judge in the sky about the right way to meditate, Mike? Just like get over yourself, do what works for you. So for me, I do two things when I meditate. Sometimes I meditate, almost always, 99 times out of 100. Again, I'm laying on my back in bed in the morning. Every now and again, if I'm sitting on an airplane or whatever, but I often will listen to a guided meditation on Headspace or on YouTube or something to get me into that zone. And then sometimes I do it without that, but I don't find that I get to some nirvana place of like, I have no thoughts. I get to just this blissed out, completely enlightened place. It's just constantly being aware of and being mindful of my thoughts. And for me, when I can visualize things or think about things specifically, or ask questions or see scenes, that usually helps me personally. And the good news about these days, for what it's worth, there are so many meditation apps and techniques and books and teachers. And I know there was already a session here, I believe, that Mark led on meditation. And I'm sure you have resources that you can find what resonates for you and what works for you, and play around. And I've also learned of, 28 going on 30 years of meditation, change it when you need to change it. If it's not working, I had a teacher years ago say to me, Mike, it's less about the meditation and it's more about your life. If you notice you're feeling more calm and peaceful in your life, then whatever meditation practice you're using is probably working. If you notice you're feeling really great when you meditate, but you're like yelling and screaming at people and flipping them off in traffic, your meditation practice probably isn't working. So pay attention to your life. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Other questions about anything related to meditation or mindset or authenticity? Yeah, and I think, look, someone said in the comments, fake it till you make it versus authenticity. Look, I think those things, again, don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think sometimes we do have to fake it till we make it to kind of get ourselves going in some area, because if you've never done it before, how are you going to be able to do it? When I first started my business, and even still now, there's times I just have to show up and act as if I know what I'm doing because I don't know how to do it yet. And then eventually I figure it out. We can do that authentically. And sometimes we may even verbalize that to ourselves, to other people. Sometimes it wouldn't be appropriate to do that. So we just show up and we figure it out and we learn, through experience. So I do want to touch briefly on this one last piece of appreciation before we wrap up here, because I think this is so simple, but it can be profound for us personally, for the people around us, for our families, for our teams. There's a difference between recognition and appreciation. We use those words interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. They're both important. And for you as leaders and with your teams, you want to do both of these things, but you want to understand what the difference is. Recognition is positive feedback based on results, based on performance, based on outcome. It's conditional. It has to be earned. Someone produces a result, someone closes a deal, someone makes something happen, then there's recognition. You as a team, you get to some milestone, you have something happen. Recognition is an outcome, right? I was an athlete for many years. Sometimes you win the game. If you win the game or you win the championship in the season, there's recognition that goes along with that. If we lose or we don't perform well, there shouldn't be recognition. So recognition is about performance, it's about outcome. Appreciation, on the other hand, is about people. It's about their value. Recognition is about what we do. Appreciation is about who people are. Appreciation is about caring about people, listening to people, honoring and acknowledging people, not for their performance, but for who they are, for their effort, for their skills, for their presence, for just being human. Not everyone deserves recognition all the time. We don't always deserve recognition. Sometimes we don't produce the result we want. But everybody is worthy and deserving, and quite frankly, especially these days, needy of appreciation. So being able to express appreciation for the people around us is super important, to do it authentically. Recognizing when people perform well and have done something well and deserve recognition, that's important as well. But oftentimes the accomplishment itself has some baked in recognition, or, hey, I know I did well. It's nice when I get some feedback, but I don't necessarily need it. When we often need to appreciate ourselves and each other is when things are stressful or challenging, or we haven't necessarily produced the result. All those years as an athlete, I would get lots of pats on the back and lots of cheers and lots of awesome way to go when I performed well. When I didn't perform well, mostly everybody left me alone because there wasn't anything to recognize. But those were the moments that I really needed to be appreciated, to be reminded of the fact that I was still valued and cared about and still part of the team. Great leaders recognize people when they deserve it and appreciate people all the time, and have some sense of how appreciated or not appreciated are people feeling. Does that make sense? Again, little things, thanking people, taking a little time at the beginning or the end of a meeting, checking in with people, asking them how they're doing, and really wanting to know, being connected with what's happening in people's lives. I mean, look, you all are dealing with a situation collectively and at a macro level. It's hard not to, at least. It's one of the blessings and the silver linings for me of the pandemic is, like, I've had so many conversations with so many people around the world just about, how are you doing? How's it going? And we often will just share, here's what's happening for me, for my family, for my, like, not that we want to be going through this, not that you all want to be going through it, but we can use it as an opportunity to connect more on a human level with each other. You know, remember earlier when I was saying the natural human response to self-righteousness is defensiveness? You know what the natural human response to vulnerability is? Empathy. And when it comes to appreciation, look, some of us are more motivated by appreciation than others, but I've never heard this in my entire life. And I have literally talked to so many people about this in 20 years of doing this work, in interviewing people and researching. I've never heard anyone say to me, you know what, Mike, I'm just too appreciated. It's just too much. I wish my kids and my spouse and my friends and my coworkers and everyone would just stop appreciating me. It's really getting on my nerves. No, nobody's ever said that to me. You know why? Because no one actually feels that way. No one feels most of us feel somewhat, if not significantly, underappreciated. So if you can create a culture and an environment, yes, we're going to work hard. Yes, we're going to push ourselves and each other. Yes, we're going to produce results. So we're not going to sugarcoat it when we fail. We're not going to blow smoke and pretend like we're doing well when we're not. But we're going to value each other. We're going to care about each other. We're going to appreciate each other. And that's going to be something that drives the culture. So, questions about this, about appreciation or anything else? Stacy's saying in Ukraine now we have to have jokes that asking how are you is a direct expression of love. Yeah. Because just saying how are you, like a greeting, like, hey, how are you? How's it going? I mean, it has a whole different meaning when you're going through what you all are going through. And it really is, like, people want to know that other people around them actually care about their well-being and not just their role or their performance or the outcome. And the outcome's important, obviously. It's not to say that it's not, but when we separate it out, we recognize what deserves recognition. You know, I had an old baseball coach of mine on my podcast a couple of years ago, and he said this great thing. And this guy's I love this guy. He's a friend, a mentor. I've stayed connected with him all these years after college. But he said this great thing to me. He said, Mike, my philosophy for coaching, and he coached at Stanford University for 37 years, had a ton of success. He was one of the best college baseball coaches in the entire country here in the US. And he said, my philosophy for coaching was always this. He said, I knew that I had to love you hard so I could push you hard. And I was very surprised to hear that come out of his mouth, to be honest, even though I know him and love him. I said, Dean, what do you mean by that? He said, I knew that with every player that I coached and every team that I coached, the first thing I had to do was establish that I loved and cared about you individually, collectively, because once I did that, you would then give me permission, either explicitly or more implicitly, to push you as hard as I needed to push you to get the most out of you. And I thought, wow, like that's a great philosophy for sports coaching, but also just for life and business and leadership. Can we love people first, love them hard, and then with respect and with permission, push them hard? I think a lot of times in business and in leadership, we do those things in the opposite direction. We push people hard first, they prove it. And then of course, I'll show you some love if you earn it. And it's like, doesn't really set up the healthiest environment for people. So questions, thoughts, comments about appreciation or anything else before we wrap up? I do have one last story I want to share, but just want to check in to see if anybody has any other questions. I'm appreciating all the comments and the questions in the chat. Hopefully I haven't missed anything good to respond to. Okay. Oh, thanks, Ariane. Yeah. So my books, Ariane mentioned that they're right behind me. You can see them up there. But my most recent one is called "We're All in This Together." There's one called "Bring Your Whole Self to Work," and "Nothing Changes Until You Do." They're on my website, which is mike-robbins.com. So thank you for the appreciation. Thank you, Ariane, for asking me to mention that. Oh, I like, Andrew, you like lying down as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that to that point though, Andrew, like I think a lot of times in our minds, whether we're talking about meditation or we're talking about leadership or we're talking about parenthood or we're talking about a lot of things, I think we have an image, I should say, in our mind of what it's supposed to look like, as opposed to what it actually looks like and what actually works for us. So my invitation to all of you is you think about some of the things that I've shared, whether it's about mindset or authenticity or appreciation, as you've listened to or will listen to some of the other coaches that come on each week in these sessions. Try stuff on. All the different things you read and you learn and the TED Talks that you watch and the podcasts that you listen to and all that stuff. I really think it's important for us to be inspired by others, to listen to and learn from others, and always try it on for ourselves and go, how does this fit for me? How does this fit for my team, my group, my family, my country, my situation? Because it's going to be a little different. All right. So yes.
Would you mind if I'll jump with a question? So
Please.
Getting back to authenticity, I feel that authenticity is connected with self-esteem for the person to be kind of brave enough to express. So my question is, what would be your advice to encourage authenticity in the team, for the teammates?
Look, thank you for the question. And I agree with you. I do think there's a connection between authenticity. That's what's interesting about, we think of like vulnerability as weakness, when in reality, if we can share some of our vulnerabilities, it's actually a real sign of courage and strength. And with self-esteem, or the fact that the better I feel about myself, the more likely I'm going to feel okay showing up and being myself. The more I feel down about myself, the more I'm going to feel like I either have to hide or I have to like polish up some fake version of myself to show to everybody, right? I think in terms of your question about encouraging authenticity, the best way for us to encourage authenticity is to do what Gandhi taught us all, right? Be the change, so if you want people to be more authentic, be authentic, show that, model that, especially when we're in positions of leadership. If that's how you operate, that's how you communicate, that's how you show up, you're going to give people permission to do the same. Now, they're not going to necessarily do it just because you do it. But if we're wanting other people to be authentic with us, the best thing we can do is start by being authentic with them. And also celebrate it when it happens. Thank people for telling the truth. Thank people for bringing up hard conversations. Thank people for giving feedback. Thank people for admitting things, vulnerabilities. There's a great quote from Tom Peters, who's a great, business and leadership expert. He says, celebrate what you want to see more of. So when we see that, just, hey, thank you. I really appreciate you bringing this up, even if it's uncomfortable, right? Sometimes someone comes and gives you some hard feedback. It's like, ouch, but hey, thanks for telling me. I'd rather you tell me than go tell someone else and just be upset with me. So any other questions or thoughts or comments before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I also have one to ask, if you don't mind. I wanted to go back to actually this dealing with uncertainty, and in situation we are actually, one of the points was that you are not able to plan even for the week or a month like before. How to, maybe your recommendation, combine it with this kind of growth mindset? Is it about just taking some kind of vision and recreate it for yourself, whatever, to just sit and create some kind of vision, or just take it as it is and have no plans and like relax with having no plans for future right now? Like what is a, I don't know, better approach from your perspective?
Look, I mean, look, I think even in much more normal and stable times when you're not dealing with a war or we're not dealing with a pandemic, in most startup environments especially, but even in bigger, more established businesses, I think a lot of plans, a lot of strategies, a lot of visions always have a bit of an asterisk by them. It's like, well, this could change. I think given, you take the startup environment, you take what's going on in Ukraine, you take what's going on in the world, I think it's even more pronounced. And so I think it's important for all of us personally, but also with our teams, to have a general idea, a general vision, a plan, even some goals, but at the same time, paradoxically know it may change tomorrow. It may change next week. We may have to pivot next month. We may have to pivot 5 times over the next 3 months or 6 months. And that doesn't devalue the fact of having the plan or the vision. I think what we've all been forced to go through, I think, over the last couple of years, and what you all, I imagine, are intensely focused on, or have to be to some degree, is staying in the present moment. Right? My wife and I actually had a bit of a mantra in the early days of COVID when we were really freaked out. The business was really wobbly. Things were really tough. Our girls were home from school. There was so much going on. There was all the fear, everything around us. We would look at each other and say, we don't know how to do this, but we'll figure it out. And all we're going to do is show up and be present and try to do the next right thing. And let's try to figure out what that is all the time. And sometimes we knew, and sometimes we didn't, and sometimes we had to change, right? And early on, about 6 months into the pandemic, I said to my own team, I'm out of the prediction business, because I kept trying to predict what was going to happen with COVID, and I kept being wrong. And I finally realized, you know why I'm doing that? Because I'm really scared. And I don't like this, and it's super uncomfortable. And I keep trying to predict the future because I want some stability and I want some certainty, but that's actually making things worse for me and for everyone. And the whole team laughed and they thanked me and they said, okay. And I told them, when I start predicting the future, please remind me, that's not your job, Mike. Your job is to just show up and do the next right thing. We'll figure it out together. So I hope that resonates a bit, Anna. I appreciate that question. So how to remain authentic, Natalia's asking this in the chat, when you understand that your identity because of the outside situation changes right now. I think, again, it's being able to hold that paradox so we can be authentic and at the same time know that there are so many factors at play that are influencing and impacting so much of what we do and can do, can't do, will do, won't be able to do. And it's, look, I don't like it. I can't even imagine what it's like for all of you. And back to that, why is it happening for us? It's a skill that we can build right now that will benefit us not only in getting through this difficult time, but down the road. Because let's hope there's not another war or another pandemic anytime soon, but we don't know. And you're not through that. It's not over. The world isn't over. The pandemic. So again, it's like we get to sit in the discomfort of it, acknowledge the discomfort and say, how can I show up authentically in the face of this? And what can I learn from this? So look, there's one last story I want to share that kind of wraps a lot of what we've been talking about together to some degree. If any of you want to stay in touch with me or connect with me more about my work or what I do, I think the link to my website is on the website for this program. It may be, I'm not on the Slack channel, but maybe it can be in there. It's just mike-robbins.com. I love what I do. I'm super passionate about it. I'm grateful that Ariane and the team at Lift 99 invited me to come and do this. I do want to close with one last story just to wrap this all up. I got a chance to see Oprah Winfrey speak a few years ago at an event, which was pretty cool. Oprah's a pretty big deal here in the US. She's kind of a big deal around the world. She's someone I've always respected and admired for many, many reasons for a long time. And, she had an incredibly successful television show here in America for 25 years and has run her own network for the last decade or so. And she said, I've interviewed thousands and thousands and thousands of people in my career. I've interviewed everybody, presidents, prime ministers, celebrities, children, people who have gone through tragedies, people who have been incarcerated. You name the type of person, Oprah said, I've interviewed them. She said, after all these years and all these interviews, do you know that just about every single person I've ever interviewed asks me some version of the same question when the interview's over? The camera shuts off, they lean over and they say, how'd I do? Or was that okay? Some version of that question, right? And she said, early in my career, I used to be really confused by this question, because I'd be sitting across from someone who's very successful, very accomplished, and I'd be wondering to myself, are they really that insecure? Do they really need my, right? Do they need my validation? What is that? She goes, then I finally realized something. They're not actually asking me how they did. She said, you know what they're really asking me? Did you see me? Did you hear me? Did what I say matter to you? She said, and I agree with her, everybody's asking those questions all the time, especially these days. No matter how confident or accomplished they may be or seen, people want to know that they're seen and that they're heard, and not just what they say, but who they are matters. And if you can be the kind of leader, you can be the kind of human being that in the midst of everything, the war, the pandemic, the stress, the challenge, the uncertainty, the pivoting, the decisions you have to make, the insecurity, the everything, the goals, the aspirations, the visions, the passion, in the midst of all of that, if you can see people and hear people and let them know they matter, not only is that a benefit to them, it's a benefit to you, it's a benefit to everyone around you. And it's how we really embody and exemplify that we're all in this together. So thanks for joining. I appreciate being able to be here with all of you. I hope you found this useful and valuable in some way.
Mike, thank you so much. It was like, I don't know, it was super cool, really. Yes, like we're really thankful for your time, and it was very interactive. Everybody was in, I think. Yes, lots of thanks in the comments. I believe you see them. We really appreciated it. And to all of you folks, we're waiting for you next Wednesday for a session. Please don't miss it out, because you can see what you can miss out right here. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot.
Be well. We're all praying for you.